Welcome to our continuing series of Virtual Voices, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Mr. Igor Shpiniov, who is the Chief of Office of the Undersecretary General for United Nations General Assembly and Conference Management. Also, he is the Secretary of the International Annual Meeting on Language Arrangements, Documentation, and Publications. When Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, Mr. Shpiniov realized that language professionals in the UN were limited, and he began Language Training Division to enhance interpreters' language capacity and strengthen their understanding of international relations. The United Nations Department of General Assembly and Conference Management has the largest staff in the UN Secretariat because it is composed of two parts. It provides secretariats to all committees under the General Assembly in order to create an environment for each member state to reach agreements and facilitate meetings. It also provides staff for member states to understand the rules of procedures of UN meetings. Mr. Shpiniov believes that advances in technology and the use of artificial intelligence and digital technology will continue to play an important role in the operations of the department. However, technology will not replace translators and interpreters. It is already used in written translation as a first draft. Interpretation is much more difficult to replace, especially in intergovernmental meetings where precise interpretation is required. Over to you, Mr. Shpiniov.
Dr. Durbak, thank you very much for your introduction. I am pleased to be with you today. Good morning, good afternoon to all the listeners and participants. I will focus today on how the conference and intergovernmental services at the UN coped with the pandemic. What was the reaction? What were the actions taken by the UN when it was faced by the sudden disruption of its activities, when in-person meetings became impossible for some time? And what it means for the future. What are the lessons that can be learned from the pandemic experience, both positive and negative lessons? So I will start with going back a couple of years ago when the Department of General Assembly and Conference Management has, for the first time, started to conceptualize and discuss with the member states the ideas of automating and virtualizing some of the conference services operations. But for you to understand what it means, I will have probably to explain a little bit what the conference operations of the UN consist of. So the conference services at the UN, first of all, it's an integrated operation that covers several secretariat locations: New York, Geneva, Vienna, Nairobi, but also the headquarters of the regional commissions in Bangkok, in Santiago de Chile, in Beirut, and in Addis Ababa. In all those locations, which at the UN we call them duty stations, a little bit like in the military. In all these locations, member states meet, talk, negotiate, come up with the documentation, resolutions, decisions, and all that is happening in the 6 official languages of the United Nations. So that creates a need for a very robust translation and interpretation mechanism. And we have it since the beginning of the United Nations from 1946. Actually, the second resolution adopted by the General Assembly was a resolution on the language regime of the United Nations, which established that the main bodies of the United Nations have to work in the 60 languages, and all documents need to be published simultaneously in the 60 languages, unless it is specifically provided by this or that intergovernmental body for specific reasons. So overall, any meeting of the UN is supposed to be a 6-language meeting, and any document issued by the UN, an official document, of course, intergovernmental document, is supposed to be translated into all official languages. And the department where I work is in charge of this. We are establishing policies and procedures, standard operating procedures. We hire staff, we train, retain, recruit, and otherwise support language staff based on the KPIs, on the criteria established by the member states for the conference services of the UN, which are not numerous but very important. So the member states require that the UN conference services are guided by the criteria of quality, of timeliness, of multilingualism, of cost effectiveness, of sustainability and accessibility of all its services. So based on, and we are being judged by these criteria. I mean, we, the department that provides the conference services everywhere. So since 46, the United Nations has developed, and our department is at the forefront of that. The department is called Department for General Assembly and Conference Management. It has developed a very robust system of multilingual support for the intergovernmental negotiations, which also includes, as Dr. Durbak mentioned in the beginning, it includes also provision of procedural and technical advice to the intergovernmental bodies that meet in such matters as rules of procedure and other technical matters that are related to their effective functioning. So it all worked based on, of course, on the understanding that delegates meet on premises, and all the business was mostly conducted in physical presence, face-to-face, everywhere, in all the duty stations that I mentioned. But of course, with the start of the pandemic, all that became impossible. Fortunately, as I mentioned in the beginning, starting from 2012, the department has formed a vision, a forward-looking vision, a strategy of a continuous modernization and improvement of its services based on the concept of innovation, in which technologies play an important role of enabler, the enabling role. Based on the technologies, we attempted to automate as much as possible all procedures in the translation and translation support and other areas of the department, so that not to replace translators, of course, but to make sure that translators have enough tools that they can use to avoid repetitive, monotonous work that can easily be done by the machine, by the computer, and can focus on more creative parts of their work that require a really human brain. So since 2012, we have achieved quite a lot of success in automating and virtualizing our services. And I would just give you a couple of examples. In the area of documentation production, we have created ourselves using our business knowledge, but also the excellent support from our own IT professionals, the in-house developers, software engineers. We have created two systems that became what we call the enterprise United Nations systems for documents management and documents processing in 6 official languages. The systems are quite unique because although the market has the commercial, some commercial solutions, these solutions, when we looked at them, neither of them was even close to the specific needs of the UN. For many reasons, I will not go into the details, but after the market research, and we have hired at the time a consultancy company to actually look into that independently, decision was made that there is a need to develop the IT solutions, the technological solutions in-house. So we have developed a system that is called GDOC. G stands for global. So it's a system for a global system for documentation management, which works based on the UN specific workflows, takes into consideration various mandates that are related to documentation that have been provided to us by the member states. And it works as a conveyor belt, ensuring a smooth movement of the document, of the documentation from their creation, from the first drafting, through editing, through all processes until there is a high quality original. And then this original, again, is put on the conveyor belt, and it is being processed in the 6 official languages. And it's not only just the documents, the black and white, grayscale, traditional documents that UN used to produce. Now it also includes all kind of web-based content, web pages, various multimedia content solutions. And again, it's all in 6 official languages, and we do this all in-house thanks to the system that we have created. Another system is called GText, and this system is a computer-assisted translation system. It's a combination of the computer-assisted translation and machine translation. And what it does, first of all, it allows a translator to find very easily, not even to find, but it just puts on the screen all instances of the previously translated text. So in other words, if I'm a translator coming to the office in the morning and I receive a piece of paper to translate from, let's say, English into Arabic, I download the original into the system, and the system immediately comes back with all the instances of previously translated text, because the truth is that quite a lot of the UN documents are repetitive. Those of you who had a chance to take a look at the UN documentation would see that, for instance, GA resolutions repeat in most cases, same text, same paragraphs are repeated from year to year to year to year. But it is an easy example, but there are also kind of hidden references where it is not easy to identify whether or not a piece of text has been translated before. So the system, which is based on the full collection of the UN document from the beginning of the UN, the system allows to retrieve such what we call reprise, the text that was previously translated, and that, of course, ensures both quality and timeliness aspects. Why? On the quality side, because it ensures better consistency. At the UN, one of the requirements in the translation or interpretation is that things that were translated once in a certain way cannot be retranslated in a different way in a different document. So once it has been issued formally in 6 official languages, it becomes a law, in a sense that the formulations cannot be changed freely or arbitrarily unless there was a mistake spotted. But also in terms of cost effectiveness and timeliness, of course, the system cuts the time, the processing time for translators or for text processors by including into your target language text already some pieces of the text that the machine has found in its database. There are other systems. There is a special system for assigning interpreters to meetings. And it is quite a complex exercise, I should tell you. Before we came up with the system of automated assignment of interpreters, we had front offices staffed with people who spent their days in actually matching, the demand with supply, looking at the language combinations that interpreters have, their availability. Is the person on leave, not on leave, sick, not sick? Is the person experienced in translating certain types of meetings or not? Interpreting. So there are quite a number of parameters that need to be taken into consideration. And when it is done manually, it's quite a laborious exercise and quite, I should say, prone to human mistakes. So we have automated all that. And now we have a system which we continue to develop, but it already is in production. It is working already, which immediately, at a blink of a moment, it matches the characteristics of a meeting with the, let's say, capabilities of this or that interpreter. And that happens for the whole global conference servicing ecosystem. So we are able to identify, for instance, for a meeting in Geneva, we can provide remote interpretation by assigning an interpreter from Vienna or Nairobi and be part of the team. So all this became extremely critical during the pandemic, of course. When the pandemic started and everything stopped at the UN, after a couple of weeks of the initial shock, the member states still, they wanted to continue the intergovernmental process, the intergovernmental work. So the department was challenged basically by the sudden change of the environment and the need to switch to remote modes of operation. And this was the time when I personally felt extremely gratified by the fact that we've had basically all the systems ready. that ensured the business continuity, because we were thinking about that in advance, and since 2012 we were developing the systems. So, for instance, in the documentation area, the transition was extremely smooth. So the day the UN complex was closed and staff was told to stay at home, we didn't lose a single day. So translators continued smoothly to work from home. The documentation, planning, and management teams that used to work in the secretariat also very smoothly regrouped and started working from home locations in a dispersed mode. Every person sitting in his or her own bedroom or kitchen. Basically there was no interruption. So as the Secretary General but emphasized in one of his reports, thanks to the fact that our department was well prepared for such a challenge, for the need to start working remotely, we were able to preserve multilingualism at the United Nations for the time of the pandemic, which actually still continues. So now although we are gradually returning back to kind of a new normal, building forward better, as the Secretary General likes to say, still many of the meetings are conducted in a virtual mode or in a so-called hybrid mode. Hybrid mode is a situation where part of the meeting participants are physically present on premises in the meeting room, and some of them are participating remotely, but have the same facilities, have the same quote-unquote powers than the ones sitting in the room. Such as, for instance, it's not just sitting and listening and speaking, but UN meetings are quite complex. They have such elements, for instance, as voting. So we had to ensure also that electronic voting was possible if required by the member states. There are also other elements, and same with staff. Some of staff can be located on premises, and some of staff can be participating in the meeting from home. For instance, even interpreters. So, what are the main kind of observations that I have with regard to this new reality? Well, of course, it can be seen as a huge step forward in many respects. First of all, of course, no one would object that reducing the necessity to travel reduces both cost and environmental footprint of the intergovernmental machinery. This goes without saying. The more meetings, the physical meetings are replaced by virtual meetings, the less are the cost and environmental impacts on the meeting. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the need to adjust the system so that they work remotely properly and effectively required some serious additional and ongoing investment into the IT platforms. We are now on Zoom with you, but for instance, Zoom does not have the security features that are needed for the UN meetings. Zoom does not also have a multilingual support of the quality that is required for the United Nations meetings. But we cannot use Zoom, so we had to look into the market, and we had to actually invite commercial companies to bid for. We have presented a set of requirements, and invited bids from different companies all over the world to offer us remote solutions for hybrid and virtual meetings, solutions for remote participation and remote interpretation. And a lot of effort and time has been invested into reviewing the proposals, testing the platforms, working with the service providers, with the IT companies, basically telling them what they need to change, you know, and providing user feedback and so on and so forth. But still, the platforms that we have chosen and that we are using, they're unfortunately not 100% satisfactory in terms of the quality. The number one concern is the quality of sound. Problem is that when the sound travels through internet, through various systems and subsystems, it is coded and decoded several times, so it changes the quality. And although you and I, when we are talking with each other now, we may not notice this, but there are certain physical, qualitative characteristics of the sound that affect our neural systems, our cognitive systems. So the result of that is that interpreters started very soon complaining about, number one, the cognitive overload that they experience, and number two, hearing problems. So we have quite a large number of very experienced, you know, and trustworthy staff members, professional interpreters that are now, you know, on sick leaves or are experiencing medical issues intermittently and are on and off from sick leaves. And overall, there is a huge sense of dissatisfaction and unhappiness in the community of conference interpreters because of this additional stress that they are experiencing. So we, of course, reacted. The management of the Department of the United Nations, of course, reacted to that. We are investigating. We are not doctors, so we are relying on the medical professionals as far as the hearing problems are concerned. But provisionally and for the time being, we have reduced the duration of shifts for interpreters. Normally, interpreters are supposed to be in the booth for 3 hours in a team of 2. And now we are saying that if a meeting has a virtual component, a substantial virtual component that requires remote interpretation, the interpreter's shift cannot be longer than 2 hours. So that, of course, adds the cost of a meeting. So as a result, you see what I'm saying is that although we are saving in one area, we are adding costs in another area. And a real cost benefit analysis is still pending. We don't have it yet. We will have it at some point, and we will see more or less clearly what are the additional costs, but what are the reduced costs from this switch to virtual and hybrid meetings. So it's not as simple as it may seem from the beginning that, you know, more virtual and hybrid meetings are a sign of progress. Yes, but there are challenges and there are serious downsides that need to be investigated and looked at. Well, when I mentioned the cognitive overload, what I meant is that when an interpreter is seated in a booth, in a meeting room, the interpreter has an ability to see the body language, the facial expressions, see the overall environment in the room, and is also isolated fully from any external influences, can focus on her or his work, their work. Whereas in the remote environment, it's not, these conditions are not always in place, and there are external factors that really impact the quality, not just the quality of sound, but overall, I mean, the environment where people work, really not always it is a professional environment. So it is, you know, sometimes a dog starts barking from a neighbor's apartment, or someone starts hammering some nails, and so on and so forth, which is actually going on now in a nearby office here. But what I'm saying is that there are pluses and minuses in this new methods of work. But the most important thing probably is not just the technological or medical aspects, but also the legal and procedural aspects. All the rules of procedures in the United Nations are written based on the premise that meetings are happening in a face-to-face environment. So there are no rules of procedure that would govern virtual or hybrid meetings. There are no rules governing how to vote, how to call on remote participants, and so on and so forth. There's no even a definition, a formal legal definition of what a virtual meeting is, and what a physical meeting is, and what a hybrid meeting is. And the member states are, as it is often the case, are divided in their approach to the new methods of work. There are member states who very much encourage onboarding the new methods of work as part of the new normal, and a lot of smaller member states, less developed member states, actually demand more virtual meetings and more hybrid meetings, because that reduces their cost and allows, you know, people to participate in the UN meeting, for instance, from the capitals without crossing the oceans. But at the same time, there is also a group of other member states who maintain that only meetings that happen in a physical environment in the meeting room can be considered formal meetings. All the rest is informal video conferencing. And they insist on this approach, and are extremely sensitive in terms of legalizing the new methods of work as the new normal. Well, there is no unanimity in any of the bodies of the United Nations as far as the member states' perspective is concerned. So this is a big challenge. So even now we are, for instance, the department is preparing the budget for 2023. So the time, we are still in 21, but we are already writing up the budget for 23. So we cannot even, you know, include into the budget a request for additional funding to accommodate this demand for virtual and hybrid meetings, because an influential group of member states is telling us that there is no mandate for us, for the Secretariat, to actually organize such a meeting beyond the concept of business continuity. So the member states are more or less unanimous on the understanding that in the pandemic environment or in any other crisis situation, it is okay to organize meetings virtually and remotely. But in any normal situation that would go beyond the situation where business continuity is required, you know, in a standard situation, this is not acceptable. So basically, we are continuing to operate under the legal chapeau, so to speak, of the business continuity. But at some point, member states will need to take a decision, and I anticipate big and lengthy debates on many platforms and many committees. The legal committee, the fifth committee responsible for the budget, the committee on conferences, leading finally to to some kind of a consensus between the member states on what is desirable and what is not desirable, and what is admissible and what is not admissible from their perspective. But that's the trend. The trend is definitely, if 5 years ago this was not even debated or discussed, now it is actively debated and discussed. By it, I mean the pluses and minuses, the costs, benefits, and the downsides of the new methods of work that are related to virtual participation and virtual provision of services. So that's where we are in the area of conference services as it relates to the pandemic and our work in this new situation, new environment. I will probably stop here with your indulgence, Chair, and I will be happy to answer any questions that colleagues may have on the topic or in general about the work of my department, the conference services of the UN, the work of translators, interpreters. I don't know what the audience is, so it is difficult for me to guess the level of interest or the level of preparedness. But if there are any specific questions, I would rather leave the remaining time. I have time until 2 o'clock to answer the questions, if any. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shpiniov. That was really very, very illuminative, and I'm sure it was very, very helpful to all of our audience. We have many, many questions, and Susie will be asking the questions, and I'm sure, hopefully, you'll be able to answer as many as possible. So over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbak and Igor. The first few questions are related to COVID-19 pandemic. So first question is, what is the main goal of the UN conferences during COVID-19, and have the priorities changed because of the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. Well, as I mentioned, the main goal was to make sure that the intergovernmental process doesn't stop. So when the building basically was closed, and because of the social distancing and other sanitary measures, business as usual became impossible, the UN didn't stop working. And that is thanks to the conference services. The meetings were reformatted, and instead of having in-person meetings, the secretariats of all the committees and bodies have regrouped, and together with us, with the conference services, we have came up with the solutions such as virtual meetings. And in a couple of months, initially it was just basically English only, to be quite frank. We needed some time, about 3 months, to identify and test the platforms for remote interpretation and remote participation. Because as I said, solutions like Teams or Zoom that were readily available, they did not provide the sufficient quality for the multilingual aspects. So remote interpretation was not possible in Zoom, in other words. So we had to look for specific solutions and look into smaller solutions that were offered by smaller companies, and of course it created tremendous stress for the whole system: procurement, budget, interpreters who tested the systems, IT personnel that had to make sure that we have interoperability with the UN systems, and so on and so forth. security, cybersecurity aspects. You know, UN is quite a sensitive environment, so cybersecurity cannot be overestimated really in terms of the UN meetings. UN meetings have to be 100% foolproof and bulletproof in terms of, you know, interference from unauthorized participants, so to speak. So all this had to be taken into consideration. So the goals, responding to the question, the main goal was to make sure that the show goes on. Basically, the show must go on, and it went on. In the area of documentation, it was easier, but in the area of meetings, servicing, it also happened in about 3 months after the pandemic started. So that was the main goal, to ensure the business continuity of the United Nations intergovernmental process. And that's what I think we are quite proud, actually, that we have achieved it. Not many businesses or organizations were able to so effectively, quickly, and smoothly transition into the new environment, factoring in the specificities that we have, the multilingual aspect. I mean, if it were not for the 6 official languages, everything would be much easier and more natural. But the multilingualism requirement, which is extremely dear to the hearts of the member states, and multilingualism is one of the core values of the UN. So it is really extremely irritating for, let's say, non-English speaking delegates if a meeting is held in English only without interpretation. And many of them just refuse to participate in such meetings. And it is based on the legal regime that I referred to, second resolution of the General Assembly that established the language regime in the organization, specifically stipulated that all business of the UN has to be conducted in the 6 official languages. So that was the challenge, but the goal was to ensure business continuity despite the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. What are the most significant UN conferences held during COVID-19, and what topics were most often raised during those conferences?
Okay, that caught me a little bit unprepared, I should say. Well, I would refer to the recent conference in Glasgow, the COP, that everybody watched, I believe, with a lot of hope, but also which became a source of a little bit of frustration for many people in terms of the results achieved. But that's a good example of a UN conference that took place in the time of pandemic. The COP conference, although it was technically organized by UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Fund for Climate Change, located in Bonn, it was supported very heavily by the UN Secretariat, and we have sent our interpreters on site. But some of our interpreters also worked remotely and provided remote interpretation to the meetings happening in Glasgow from from somewhere else, from New York and Geneva in particular. So that's a good example. There was also a recent conference, big conference in China, in Beijing, on transport, that was also conducted in a very kind of unusual way, with a lot of hybrid and virtual components. That's another example. Now we are also looking forward to organize a meeting in Lisbon on oceans later this year, and there will be also a meeting in Doha in Qatar coming up soon. One of the big UN meetings on the, I believe, related to financing of development, unless if my memory doesn't fail me. But yes, there are less conferences that since the pandemic started, but gradually we are coming back, and the business speeds up again. But please don't forget about the core business of the UN. The most important UN conference is actually the General Assembly. So we were able to conduct the General Assembly without interruptions during all the years of the pandemic. In 2020 and 2021, the General Assembly took place in New York. It was really weird in a half-empty General Assembly hall. Only one representative from a delegation was allowed. Most of the interventions were pre-recorded and were just delivered from screen, but people in the room were still able to react and comment, and all the kind of procedural aspects were followed, meaning that the general debate took place, and it was quite animated actually, and no less interesting than before. All the documentation was prepared and issued on time in 6 official languages. Interpretation was provided. So yes, it was an unusual General Assembly, but still it was a General Assembly, and it took place. Same, the Economic and Social Council and many other bodies of the UN continued to work during the pandemic.
Thank you. Going back to COP, did you leave the conference with a positive outlook, or were you unhappy with the resolution?
Well, it's a mixture. As a person, I would have expected more concrete and ambitious commitments from the member states, definitely. So I personally am quite disappointed, but overall, at least it's movement in the right direction. But I think we all agree. I mean, everybody. I don't know anyone who wouldn't think that with this, pace, with such a speed, we will not achieve anything tangible and reverse the climate change sufficiently. If we are going to work at such a slow speed, the commitments must be much more ambitious. Definitely, I'm not a specialist in the environment in any way. I'm just talking as a layman here. But I certainly, from what I read, I see that the speed is just absolutely unacceptably slow. The speed of change.
Agreed.
We do.
One more question from the students related to COP was, what needs to be done to reach the highest level of global climate finance flows in your view?
Yeah. Well, the egotism and self-interest. I mean, the richer nations have to realize and understand that this is a global problem and that climate change has no borders. I mean, these are very simple, and even I'm saying this at a risk of uttering platitudes, but this is it's the truth. The richer nations still treat this as a negotiating process, not as a global challenge where everybody has just to come together and understand that an atmosphere doesn't have any borders. We have common air for the whole planet, and it shouldn't be a negotiation process. It should be a common brainstorming process, and the richer nations have to take the lead. So it's the same problem as in many other areas of international politics. It's on the one hand, the electorates in many countries is pushing their leaders for preserving and protecting the interests of the particular countries. But on the other hand, the leaders have to have courage and have, wisdom to also balance this with the understanding of the need to go after the common goals that cannot be achieved at a national level. There are certain things that can only be achieved at a global level, such as health or environment. This is where the UN, makes sense. UN may make sense only if there is a better understanding and realization of the fact that we can only fix the climate change issue if the humanity works on this together and not is not divided by the national interests. That there should be an understanding that it is a national interest to not really prioritize the national interest, so to speak, when we're talking about the environment.
That's actually not only the environment, but it focuses on every single aspect. And we still have not gotten the concept of the fact of a global village. There's a psychological dirt in that. We just do not see that as that. But thank you. That's very, very important comment. Susie?
Yeah, if I may add, at an individual and micro level, I think such seminars, such gatherings as you're organizing, Dr. Durbak, this talk now is a small contribution into the right direction. I think that really information is key. Information, education, realization of the scientific facts. So there is so much disinformation, misinformation, and just stupidity in the world, which is contrary to common sense and science. So every minute spent in fighting the misinformation and spreading the scientific information is a plus, and that's how we can, as a humanity, we can move in the right direction. But also pushing on the local leaders, on the national leaders, and making them understand that they will not be re-elected if they do not really produce tangible results in terms of the global climate and mitigation of the changes that we have. That's another way of doing it. Thank you. Over to you.
Susie?
Thank you. How has COVID-19 affected your work personally, and do you find in-person or virtual conferences to be more effective?
Mm-hmm. Well, my work changed a lot. For the first, I believe, 8 months or so of the pandemic, I probably visited the headquarters, my office located, on the First Avenue on the 30th floor. I've been there 2 or 3 times. I worked mostly from home. Now I go to the office 3 times a week, 4 times a week, reserving a day, sometimes 2 days a week for more focused work from home. There are pluses and minuses in work from home, definitely. I like, for instance, things like, for instance, the directors' meetings that my department has. They became much better, I think, in the virtual environment. People are much more focused. There is much less, like idle talk and time wasting. We begin on time, we end on time. It's more structured and it's in general more effective. A lot of people, however, complain that there is not enough human interaction. They want to look into my eye, and they want to rub shoulders and elbows and see the facial expressions. Maybe. I think that the truth really is in the balance. There should be probably a balance, a combination of physical interaction, not physical, but in-person interaction and virtual interaction. There's some goals are better achieved in a virtual environment. Some goals are better achieved in an in-person environment, such as, for instance, complex intergovernmental negotiations. All delegates are saying we need to meet in person. We just cannot, negotiate on complex issues. We have to work in the physical environment. That's what they say.
Thank you.
Sure.
What are the main components that affect the quality of meetings or conferences, the overall process?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as the meetings in general are concerned, I would say that the main component, every component is critical. There are no small factors here. From preparation, from documentation and quality of documentation, from the level of preparedness of the meeting participants to the quality of the services, such as interpretation and the quality of moderation, or how the chair controls the meeting and runs it, and how much the participants are goal-oriented and focused. All that really affects. As far as the virtual meetings are concerned, I think that the quality of sound is a major factor, really. Quality of sound affects the quality of interpretation. And if interpretation is of a lower quality, that leads to huge kind of semantic confusions. And people think that they are talking about same things, and in the end, it appears that they were talking about different things. So that may actually disrupt and undermine the meeting results. And that's one of the concerns that the delegations have, that in the virtual environments, the probability of mistakes, diplomatic confusions, misunderstandings is much higher than in the physical environments.
Thank you. Can you please give advice on how different organizations like youth organizations, student councils can work effectively and efficiently during the pandemic?
I think that any organization really has to rethink its methods of work. I think it is super important that analysis, serious, in-depth analysis takes place, and a discussion, a debate takes place between all stakeholders on what works well, what doesn't, and what is acceptable and what is not. And the kind of rules of engagement have to be clearly spelled out and agreed upon. That, for instance, if an organization wants to be able to take decisions in a virtual environment, there should be an acceptance a priori from all the stakeholders that this is legally acceptable, so that no one can challenge later that it was not a formal meeting, but it was a video conference, so the decision is not legal, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to talk through all the rules of engagement from the start, taking in consideration the new environment, the change in the environment in which the meetings take place. That's what is acceptable what works in the in-person environment may not necessarily work equally effectively in a virtual environment, and vice versa. So before running, one should learn to walk, so to speak, and before really moving into new methods of work, there should be a discussion of the new methods of work. That's my advice.
But you're talking about the rules of procedures. And that's very, very true. You really need to get everybody on the organization to agree to the new rules of the procedures, whatever they are implemented. Susie?
Thank you. We know that language influences the way we think and communicate. And sometimes when you speak a foreign language, you feel very uncomfortable, even though you may know it very well. So how does this affect the flow of communication during UN conferences?
Excellent question. I will answer this question, and I will take one more question, and then I will need to run. But that's actually the point of multilingualism regime, because it is based on the understanding that not everybody is equally comfortable communicating in foreign languages. So idea is that the person can better express one's views using the mother tongue. Or if that is impossible, at least the second best language, So that's behind the idea of multilingualism in the UN. In Europe, if you noticed, the European institutions went much farther than the UN. Their regime of multilingualism is that the European Union has 27 official languages. So basically all the languages of all member states of the European Union are considered official. And any delegate from any country, including Malta or Greece or Cyprus, small member states, is entitled to speak one's own language and receive interpretation during meetings into one's own language. So we at the UN, of course, because of the cost considerations and also because we are a huge organization, we have 197 member states. And you can only imagine how many languages and dialects of the languages are spoken in the world. So full multilingualism is not possible. What we have is something that was created after the Second World War, organically based on the results of the Second World War. The nations that won the war, basically, they have established the language regime, and then two more languages were added, Chinese and Arabic, but not, for instance, German, not, for instance, Japanese, not Bangla. Bangla, for instance, is the second most widely spoken language in the world. But there is no Bangla at the UN. There is no Hindu at the UN. So our regime is limited, but at least it is something. At least it is something allowing the delegates to better express their views and understand what's going on in the meeting room.
Thank you. So last question.
Okay.
How long did it take to make the systems for translators and document managers, and what challenges do interpreters face?
Well, from A to Z, I should say probably the documents management system, from conceptualizing to production, took about 3 years. But the process is still going on. This is a very, very interesting, not interesting, but one of the features one of the things that I observed is that work actually never stops on these systems, and they are under continuous improvement status. They are improving as we go, but from conceptualizing to production, about 3 years, and the GText, the computer-assisted translation system, I would say a little bit, maybe more, maybe 5 years. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Susie. And Igor, thank you very, very much for a very, very interesting and informative presentation. As you know, we have a lot of students and interns and others that are always watching. And we do try to focus on the scientific information and not on the pie in the sky. Your comment about the lack of the global village philosophy is very, very pertinent at this time because it affects everybody. And many people do not realize that human beings will not be able to survive very well if the temperature goes above 2 degrees. So thank you again. I hope we will be able to call upon you next time. In the meantime, have a wonderful season, a wonderful Christmas, both Latin and Ukrainian, and do take good care of yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Веселих свят всім українцям.
Дякую. Па-па.
Bye.
Bye.